I went outside of my comfort zone and I read a book that is not kind of part of the genres that I like, and I'm pleasantly surprised. You're about to watch me read The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I'm going to be updating you periodically with my thoughts as I'm reading the book. So let's go back in time to right before I read this book. I think I have decent expectations for this book. I don't expect it to be like my favorite book that I'll read this year, but I do still expect it to be a good book. And the reason I say I don't think it will be a favorite of mine, because it is a little bit outside of the genres that I usually read. Usually I'll read romance or fantasy or romantasy, and this one is more like a thriller kind of story, thriller mystery, which I do tend to like those. I just don't like them as much as I like the other stuff, but coming in open-minded, I think it'll still be good. So from my understanding, The God of the Woods is basically about this camp counselor, and this 13-year-old girl goes missing at this camp. And what's suspicious about it is that she had a brother who like 14 years ago went missing the exact same area and who was never found again. So it's like this big search party trying to figure out like what happened to her. Is it the same person? Can we find her in time? That kind of stuff. And it has ties to like communities and inheritance and like I think like old money as well. So that's pretty much all I really understand about it. I think that it sounds pretty interesting. I like the cover of it. I don't know if it's gonna have any fantasy-esque, just like the name of it sounds like it might, but I don't see anything, at least in the summary, mentioning that it's kind of like fantasy. If it is, that would be a very pleasant surprise. But either way, I think that it is an interesting sounding story, and I do tend to like mysteries. So yeah, without further ado, let's read this book. But wait, we know the drill. This is the hardcover with the dust cover, and that's gotta come off first. So this is a book of the month book, so I think it will just have the month that I bought it, but we'll see what color. Oh, okay. It's a good color. For some reason I thought it was black at first, but it matches. I like when it matches the cover. That's good. And go. Yeah. Very nice. All right, so I actually really like the green of this. I'm like looking at it, and the more I look at the green, I'm actually like, it's actually really nice because it's almost fall time. So it's kind of a fallish book, maybe. We'll see. It kind of looks like one. So yeah, let's read this book for real now. So I'm now a little bit more than 100 pages into The God of the Woods, and here are my thoughts so far. This is a very well-written book. I really, really respect that about it, and it has this cool, like, non-linear timeline. And so it's basically following events from, like, the 1950s to the 1970s. And so different characters doing different things, because it's like, there's the story of kind of one of our main characters, Alice, and she's the mom of Bear and Barbara. And so Bear is the boy who went missing like many, many years ago before Barbara goes missing in the current timeline. And so learning about Alice's character, how she ended up getting involved with Peter Van Leer, who is like her husband, and really what it's like. And then she has a relationship with like her sister, who's like older, and her sister has this husband that knows Peter Van Leer. Like everybody's all connected in a way. And so I really like Alice's character, and I think that she feels so real and so flawed, and I just feel really bad for her because she was an average student, like she barely passed, and so she has trouble with like spelling and reading and stuff, and so her husband didn't know that until like years later into their marriage, and he's like, wow, like you're like not very smart, huh? Like, so he's like kind of mean to her, and it's like, oh, because like the first 2 years together he was like really nice and sweet to her and was like trying to help her like learn stuff, and then eventually he just got like fed up. So she does not have a very happy life, and especially because like her son goes missing, and then in the current timeline her daughter goes missing. So yeah, it's really interesting to see this character and like what her story was all about. The 50s, 60s timeline, there's also a character named Carl that we meet, and he's like the groundskeeper, and he has like interesting backstory as well. Like he ended up getting the job because he had a sick kid and he knew nothing about the job, and then he just kind of like learned how to do it. And so he's interesting as well, and he's a volunteer firefighter, and he was very close to Bear, and he basically was like teaching Bear a lot of stuff, and then when Bear went missing, he was the last one to see Bear. And so now he's kind of helping lead the search party, trying to find this lost boy that we know in the current timeline is still lost. And then there's also the Hewitt family. So there's Vic Hewitt and TJ Hewitt. And so Vic Hewitt is essentially, he's not like a butler, they don't call him a butler, but he's essentially like a butler in the past timeline. And then his daughter, TJ, is like the camp leader in the current timeline. And so that's cool as well, because you see TJ as like a little kid, and then you see TJ as an adult, and TJ was like best friends with Bear. So that's important as well for the story. And then in our main timeline, we have Barbara, who is the daughter of Alice and Peter. And so she's very punk, which is very kind of like, people are like, oh, like what's going on? But because she's like the daughter of the people who own this super famous camp, they're just like, everyone's kind of in awe with her. And she ends up becoming friends with our other main character, Tracy. And Tracy comes from a very rich family. Everybody's super rich to be part of this camp. And she is not conventionally pretty. And she's very shy, and she has trouble with like socialization. And so she's kind of like an outcast. So she and Barbara end up becoming friends, which is really cute. And then we have another character named Louise, who is like the camp counselor who notices that Barbara's missing. And she has her own story as well. All of these characters have very realistic stories. So like she is engaged to this guy, but she doesn't actually really care about him. She just cares about like how it looks, I guess. But like she knows that she's not happy, but she doesn't really know how to remove herself from that. And then there's this guy at the camp that she likes, so there's like a little bit of a romance that could be brewing on the side there as well. So yeah, a lot of characters, a lot of flawed characters. They feel very real, and each timeline is searching for either the son or the daughter. So I thought that was really cool, and it seems like that's the kind of story. I think it's like they're searching for these kids while we're learning more about the characters. And I think the reason it's called The God of the Woods, and it's because they mentioned it in the book. So Pan, in I think it's like Greek mythology, is like the god of the woods, and people who go in, he likes to play kind of pranks on them and get them lost and stuff, and the more you like panic, the harder it is to get out. And so I think they're using that, not that there's actually going to be a god of the woods in this book, but just showing like how difficult it is when you do get lost in the woods. And it reminds me of a movie I watched called Jungle, which was based on a real story, and that movie was terrifying because it's literally just like some guys who got lost in the woods, and like there's starvation, and you get hungry, and what happens when you get injured, and you like hallucinate, and like all this, and like you get really distorted when you're lost in the woods. And that's essentially the thing that happens to these characters. Like they get lost in the woods and they can't find these kids, and they're looking for these kids, and the kids get lost in the woods. And like we haven't seen anything about like where the kids' whereabouts are. Like, are the kids actually okay? Is Bear alive? Is Barbara alive? How did they both go missing in the same area? And there's also this like short chapter about a prison escapee named Jacob, so I feel like he's involved somehow. So yeah, that's where we're at so far. Definitely different than the stuff that I usually read, but it's a nice change of pace, and it does feel like a good kind of book to read at that time of the year where it's still technically summer, but it's turning into the fall time. So yeah, I'm having a good time with this. I'm going to continue to read The God of the Woods, and I will update you probably around the halfway mark. We'll see. It's like a bigger book, so I might update you a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit later. We'll see, but tentatively, I'll see you when I hit the middle of this book. See you then. next day, and I'm now a little bit more than halfway through The God of the Woods, and the story is definitely starting to pick up now. The first 200, maybe 300-ish pages were really focused about giving you the backstory of all of these characters that we're going to get to know. I really like the non-linear timeline in this book, because it's like every single chapter is basically now ending on a cliffhanger. It's like something happens with Alice when she's like a lot younger, and then it's like bam, cliffhanger, bam, present, what's Alice up to now? Or like, what is this character up to now? What was this character doing before? And so we have these two things happening in the book, where it's the Bear timeline and the Barbara timeline. And I think that it's really cool, and it seems like all of our narrators are super unreliable, which I dig, because there's something with Louise that she's not telling us as the reader, but she's now been involved in this investigation because like Barbara was one of her like campers and stuff. So there's some stuff that I'm pretty surprised about that's happening, but like in a good way. We're also introduced to a new character, which is named Judy, and she is basically one of the junior investigators in the Barbara timeline. And so she's just been interviewing people, trying to figure out like, did Barbara run away? Did she get lost in the woods? Did someone take her? Like, what's happening with that? And then we get a few small chapters of the Jacob guy, who I'm not sure his significance, because I think that he's not who they think he is, but maybe I'm completely wrong, and maybe there's something really messed up there, I'm not sure. And I have some ideas about what happened to Bear, and I actually don't think that Bear died. I think that Bear has been visiting Barbara, and Barbara's just been claiming it's her boyfriend, but it's actually her brother. But there's not like anything boyfriend, girlfriend with them. It's just the guys that she's using. And I think that's what's happening. I think that she's visiting him, and maybe he's like trying to help her because like she's really unhappy, and like all that. And so I'm curious about that. Maybe that's not what's happening. Maybe it actually was like a boyfriend. Maybe she was involved with somebody much older who actually was like a boyfriend, but she's like 13. And so it's very creepy if that's the case. If it's not Bear, who's like just kind of helping her out and giving her advice and stuff, and it's actually somebody else who's like suspect number 1 in the book, who was her like boyfriend, that will add a lot more complexity to the story, and it's kind of like icky if that's the case. So yeah, that's pretty much where we're at right now. Learned about the characters, the investigation is ongoing, we're getting little bits and pieces, certain things are kind of happening, especially what was found in a certain suspect's car. So we're going to continue to read and find out what's going to happen in this book. And yeah, we'll see what happened to Barbara, find out what happened to Bear, see how all the stories are concluded. So yeah, I'm going to continue to read The God of the Woods, and I will update you when I finish this book. So I will see you then with my final thoughts. I just finished Liz Moore's The God of the Woods, and she can really write. The way that she formulates her sentences and creates characters and really just understands the timeline that she writes in, I think is super cool, and I was like hooked. For me, the non-linear timeline, I know I've said this like 100 times already, but that's the best part of the book. And there's so many characters, but you don't feel like you're overwhelmed or getting lost, just like reading about the characters, because every single character has something interesting that's happening to them, and you don't even really get the main character until like way later in the book. And the main character, I would say, is Judy, because she's the like the main investigator, the person who's actually like really looking into this, following leads, and just doing what she needs to do. And so I really like her, and what I like about her as well is that she's the only female investigator, and that's because like the timeline, like that timeline there is 1970s, and so the entire book from like the 1960s, 1970s talked a lot about like how women can't do certain things and that women shouldn't be doing this or that. And so it was really nice to see like a strong female lead kind of like pushing through that and just kind of carving her own path and being independent with like no love story or anything either. She was just doing her job and did a really great job at it. I will say though that for the other female main characters like Alice and Louise, they didn't really, I guess they kind of annoyed me because there are so many things that I'm like, oh yes, you can do this now. And then it's like, they just don't seem to learn. And that kind of annoyed me. And like, I think that it was really great how different all of the characters were and they all had their own struggles and stuff. But I was really hoping for, I guess, a better ending for Alice, a better ending for Louise that, I don't know. I just felt like their characters were just kind of annoying, I guess. They didn't really do much, I guess. Like they did stuff, but they mostly just like got into trouble. But Barbara's character, I like Barbara's character. I like Tracy's character. Tracy's character isn't like my favorite, but I think that she's a good depiction of like a 13-year-old girl. And then Barbara's character I think is really good as well because she is that kind of independent, colors outside of the boxes, a kind of like person. So I thought that was good. And then TJ's character was interesting as well as her dad, Vic. And the whole like history. This book has a very well thought out history, and I don't know if this is like based on like anything real, but for me, at least it felt like it was, because the way that it's like all of the different generations kind of go together and how the story makes sense for that, it just felt really, really realistic. Like I was reading a history book, but like for me, history is fun. But sometimes when I'm like, oh, it's like I read a history book, people are like, oh, I don't want to read that. But it's like a fun history book, which is like redundant for me. And there are definitely a lot of moments as well in the book where I was like, ooh, that's a nice twist. Some stuff was predictable, but the main kind of aspects weren't. So I really liked that. I liked the way that the book ended as well. I think that's a perfect way to end a story like this. And I was definitely like turning the pages, especially like once I hit the middle. I will say that the beginning of the book definitely starts off a little bit slow. I think that there are definitely like chapters in there that you're like, ooh, because like for me, it's kind of interesting because I was like reading it and at some points I'm like really, really hooked. And then other points I'm like, okay, that's fine, whatever. Like I'm looking at a page and then I'm like hooked again. And then when I got more towards, like I mentioned, that middle part, then I was just like completely into it. And I was like, I need to know what happens. So I definitely understand the hype for this book. And I also understand this cover way better. I was really confused like what this was. But now I get it, and I'm like, ooh, that's clever. I like that. I like when the book is giving you little hints just from the cover of it. That's pretty fun. Yeah, overall, this was definitely a good book. It's like half family drama, half police investigation. And there's like a lot of characters, and it really just kind of grips you, and it doesn't feel like a 500 plus page book, which was really nice because I think I just started this like 2 days ago, and I was like, oh, this book's gonna take me forever, especially when I was at the slower parts, but no. I ate this book. So today we will be awarding The God of the Woods a total of 4 stars. It wasn't my all-time favorite book of all time. It could have been paced a little bit better in my opinion, but I think overall it's definitely a decent read, and it's something that I don't usually read. It's very outside of my usual domain, but I really enjoyed it, and I think it really has to do with the writing of Liz Moore. She definitely knows how to write, and I learned a lot about the 1960s and the 1970s that I obviously wasn't around for, and I thought that that was really cool. Like, as somebody who does write in past time periods, I like to write in the 1940s timeline though, and I'm like, oh wow, like people, I have to remember that people, like this was actually something that people experienced and people talked like this and women were treated like this, and I'm like, ooh, that's yeah. But she does a really great job in like understanding the time period and just weaving everything together. I think that is really great. I bet if this was a book that I would read again, there's probably a bunch of hints at the beginning as well for all of that other stuff. Yeah, so pretty decent read. So the next book that I'm going to be reading is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I was looking for something on my shelf that's like kind of fantasy, fae, romancy, but isn't too long, and so I was like, yeah, this is good. The only thing though is that something about this cover, when I touch the cover, it's like this really gross material. It's real nasty, and I wish that you could like feel it, but it's like, ugh. So if you're interested in watching me read Half a Soul or any other book that happens to be on my never-ending TBR, definitely hit the subscribe button if you haven't already and turn on the bell notification. That way you get notified anytime a new video comes out. If you enjoyed this video and you're a fan of like family drama, murder mystery kind of stories, definitely hit the like button, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!